Yeah, if they speak in Russian, then you need this. Hello and welcome to the session Education Ecosystems for Future Economy. So the session we're about to have is one of the emerging responses to the question, how do we prepare people for the transforming, for the evolving economy, and how can we make technical, vocational, education and training systems more adaptive, more flexible, more oriented towards lifelong learning, and more focused on humans as whole persons, so not just focusing on some specific skill sets, but allowing people to develop certain life skills and develop for life. And conversations about how to make it were happening probably for the last 20 years. But it seems that in the last decade, we see more and more of practical responses emerging. So we have here in this panel two esteemed guests coming from different parts of the world. Jen is now moving to the back, but she's an expert from Australia, who is one of the leaders of helping young people in Australia to find their careers and find their pathways in life, and working with employers, with many educational providers and so on. And Vishal is working in India. He has an outstanding project called Dream a Dream, which helps people, over 1 million kids in India, who have let's say, lack of opportunities, how to make their pathway in life. He helps empowering them. He helps giving them skills that allow them to succeed and also find their vocation. So these are two examples, but there are actually many more. So first of all, I wanted to talk about, so my name is Pavel Luksha, and I'm a facilitator here, but I'm also one of people who directly work with this issue of how do we make this transition happen? What is educational ecosystem? Why it's needed? And I'm going to share very briefly, some of the results of our work, because we have been studying this emerging paradigm across the world, connecting with many case studies all over the planet, and also conducting a number of projects that help leaders develop the qualities or capacities to work with educational ecosystems. So among other things, we're conducting projects called Ecosystem Accelerators. You might have heard about project accelerators or startup accelerators. But as a matter of fact, we can also accelerate the rise of such ecosystems. But we can talk about this later on at the end of the session. So, to begin, I think this has been a recurrent topic in many conversations across the conference yesterday and today, that we are actually living in a very dynamically changing environment, and many of these changes are brought by accelerated technological change. Digital technologies, but not only digital, it's also material technologies, biotech, 3D printing, new materials, robotics, many other solutions that on one hand increase productivity, but on the other hand challenge the existing job structure. The world becomes increasingly interdependent. The value supply chains connect all the world, all the planet. If we talk about any sophisticated technological products such as smartphone, we will see that if we try to trace where it comes from, literally half of the world participates in its production, because it involves Asia, Latin America, Europe, North America, Africa, and so on. This means that the world is increasingly interconnected, we're interdependent, and that means that if one of the economies or one of the locations doesn't feel too good, if there are economic problems or financial problems, if there is political unrest, if there are climate changes and so on, in that region, that will result in turbulence that will spread around the world. So we are and the first day, yesterday, there was a discussion with Nassim Taleb, who studies uncertainty and risk. And actually that's about the world that we are facing. It's becoming strategically uncertain. And of course, one of really critical issues is what is going to be our collective futures. There's a lot of discussion about climate change, but we need to look at this even more holistically. The studies of Stockholm Institute of Resilience Studies, this diagram shows 9 dimensions, which are all critical to our futures. They're called planetary boundaries. So among these planetary boundaries are also biodiversity, which is critical for all the living systems on the planet, or the acidification of oceans, and many other things. Many of them are not even discussed in the media, but they are also critical for our futures. And if we look at this diagram, it actually tells us that we are overshooting the capacity of this planet on so many dimensions that if we don't do anything about it, in the next 50 years, our civilization may collapse and even lead to our collective die-out. That's a huge risk, but it's also dependent on us collectively if we are going or not going that way. So all of this calls for a new paradigm of education that should acknowledge the fact that we are not just training people for certain careers in the existing economy, that economy itself needs to evolve, society itself needs to evolve. The uncertainty means that we need to become more self-dependent, self-reliant, self-responsible. We need to develop what sometimes is called existential skills, or Vishal calls it life skills, that help us survive and thrive throughout lifetime. And to develop this kind of skills, it's not possible to do it in just a class. We cannot take class Life 101, so to say. We need much more comprehensive ways of learning that involve interaction with many providers, many types of educational formats. So the idea of learning ecosystems is actually to say that we see the emergence of many players that start to work with each other and support the process of lifelong learning and holistic learning of human beings as they go through that, so to say, pathway in life. And these ecosystems involve both local players, local institutions, existing institutions, some emerging institutions, new formats, as well as online providers, technological platforms that may cater to learning needs. And there can be many definitions of what is a learning ecosystem. This definition is not perfect. It's still a work in progress, but I just wanted to share with you this work in progress because it's our ongoing study where we surveyed over 35 cases of different learning ecosystems around the world. And we see some recurrent topics. And what they say that, first of all, what is the difference between existing systems and new paradigm? It's the idea that we need to move towards more dynamically evolving, something that is able to constantly renew itself. We need to move towards a system that becomes more interconnected. It's not just one college or one university. It's the collaboration between different partners in the system. It's a system that can support individual learning, but also collective learning of groups, of teams, of communities. It has to be co-created and has to be inclusive of various, if not all, stakeholders, support lifelong learning, and that happens on the personal, local, and the planetary or the global scale. And if we ask ourselves why ecosystems, why they're happening, they actually are maybe the main response from education, how to address global challenges. Because all of the challenges that I have mentioned, they are not only global, they are also cascading to very local problems. In every city, in every village, the problem of garbage, the problem of biodiversity loss, of inequality, and many other things. So to address these challenges, we need new skills of people. We need new higher mastery of specific professional skills, but also to develop the ways of thinking, the character, and many other things. And to do so, we need new learning models, which are more flexible, more personalized, and learner-centered, more collaboration-oriented, more experiential, more holistic. Ecosystem is the way to integrate these various approaches into something that provides every human being a lifelong learning opportunities. So if we kind of look at this and say, okay, let's create ecosystems, that allows to develop individual and collective capability to address societal changes, and actually that will lead to addressing the challenges that I've been mentioning. So this is a general framework that we see as coming from many cases studies and our own work in Russia, in Latin America, in Europe. But I wanted to ask now to invite Jen, are you presenting first? Yeah? To speak about a very applied and I think a long unfolded story of Foundation for Young Australians, which actually deals with many of these issues.
Thank you, Pavel, and hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. This is my second time in Russia. Anybody their first time in Russia? Second time in Russia? It's amazing. And I never thought I would be in Russia twice in 2 years, so thank you to Pavel for the invitation. It's a great country. I wanted to walk you through this case study, really, of how does a whole country, how does an entire nation think about the idea of transforming education and learning. And just to give you a quick kind of case study of where we are at. We really like this idea that this is a moment in time. There's been, every idea has its time, and this idea that we really need to reimagine education, that it's not actually working for many students, is very much a time, the time has come for that. And wherever we go in the world collectively, whether it's in Europe or Africa or in India or Australia or the United States, everyone is having this conversation right now. So this is a global conversation that we are all having about what is the future of education and learning. We, again, also thought about how these big challenges that are global challenges were impacting our children and young people. And from where we sit, automation, globalisation and the new flexible economy where young people are not actually having one job for life but could have up to 17 jobs across their lifetime and working more than one place and working casual work as well as full-time work is a very new and different world of work for many, many people in our country. And we kind of were really, I guess, challenged by this idea that we have this kind of 19th century education system. It's a 20th century structure. All the teachers in our current education systems have been trained in the 20th century, and yet we've got 21st century students. The students themselves have incredibly different skills and capabilities, even to their educators, their teachers. And so we really found that there were many issues for our children and young people around the ranking systems, and just this idea that many people have started thinking about how do you measure success in the 21st century? How can we tell that a young person or a student is successful today? And many people in our country, at least, have been talking about this and thinking about this from heads of business to heads of government. And the outcome or the end part of that story was really that many of our young people feel disengaged or bored at school. A large number, 25%, think that it's not preparing them for life, and 10% of students think it's a waste of time. When we've looked at other data, we've found that 80% of what children and young people are learning in their life is not from school. A lot of it is from the University of YouTube, or Dr. Google, or small micro-credentials. So there is a lot of learning going on, but where is that learning happening is changing. So at the Foundation for Young Australians, we decided to do research. So we've been researching for the last 4 or 5 years, 7 reports we've produced to start to tell this story about what are the new skills that we need, what are the different ways of learning, and what does the future workplace look like? And how can we quickly tell our students and our parents and our teachers about what's going to be needed? And where we've landed is this idea that we need a kind of a new learning mindset. And there are 4 elements to that learning mindset that are really critical. Number 1 is gaining new skills, and we call these skills enterprise skills. Other people have called them soft skills, but collaboration and teamwork and critical thinking and problem solving. When we think about work, we shouldn't think about old job titles like an engineer or a lawyer. Actually, in our country, most lawyers who train at university will never work in a law firm. But it doesn't mean that those skills are not profoundly important in other areas. For instance, critical problem solving and research are incredible skills. So now what we've done is we looked at 12 million jobs and we clustered those jobs based on skills, not on job titles. And now we can say to young people, if you get into a skill cluster that might be technology or information or social care, there are many jobs that you can move around in that job cluster to find a career. Not one job, but many jobs that have connected skills and capabilities. We also know that how we're going to work is changing, so we expect that we'll spend 30% of time at work learning at work. So a university degree has about a 2-year lifespan now. And we expect that every 6 years, the Deloitte report, most recent Deloitte report says every 6 years we'll have to retrain or upskill. And then finally, what we do know in our research is that optimism counts. What people think their prospects are and being optimistic about that makes a huge difference as you are leaving education. So we have a vision around this idea of mastery in lifelong learning. And so the question that we've asked ourselves is, what would it look like if every single child and person in our country had mastery in a life of learning? Not in a subject area or an area of education, but in this idea of learning for life. And so our ecosystem actually is going to operate, really the core of it is what we would call an intermediary. And there's a lot of work out of Stanford and research and Harvard about how to connect policy and connect work on the ground. Sometimes you need an intermediary, and so our job will be actually the ecosystem intermediary. And there are these 4 things that we want to do. We want to help drive a public conversation. We want to showcase innovation. We want to change policy, and we want to change the political will. We want to encourage the politicians in our country to change. And to do that, we've got a kind of a really strong vision about this idea of an ed nation that joins up all of these things. It joins up early childhood, it joins up learning, it joins up new skills and new work, it joins up different ways to measure and test and learn, no more one-size-fits-all education, and it has equal access to all in a kind of a new vision, a future that we can see. And how the 3 key goals of our ecosystem are to lead this national conversation, to provide a platform where many people can gain information and knowledge and share it, and to also privilege learners. So we want students in the centre of our ecosystem. And we're going to do that in a few different ways. We're going to do that through what we call social labs, where we get to, our first project in our social labs are going to be how we think about new pathways. So how could we make going from early childhood to primary school to high school to further education and work more seamless? In our country right now, you finish each stage and it's like a little cliff that you fall off. And the learning isn't continuous and it's not joined up. So social labs have got some principles around design and co-design which we are going to be utilising. And we also have this idea of young people at the centre of what we're doing and everything that we do, that students need to be part of the co-design of the future of education and learning. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vishal. I am from Dream a Dream, which is a foundation based in India. Thank you, Pavel, for inviting me to be part of this. I want to bring a young person back into this room. Many years back, an 18-year-old young man came up to me and he said, "Can you help me find a job?" He had dropped out of school system. He came from a relatively poor family, but he needed to now earn money. So I spoke to a few people in our network, helped him get a job of what one would call an office assistant. But really what it was that when people came into work, he was asking people whether they would like some tea or coffee, and he would bring that to them. Within a week, he ran away from work. And I met him again to understand what happened. Why did he run away from work? And he said that there were so many people in the office. Every morning, I'll go up and ask people what they need. And someone would say, "I need tea." Someone else will say, "I need black tea." Someone else will say, "I need green tea." Someone will say, "I need tea without sugar." Someone will say, "I need tea with milk and sugar." And I need a coffee. I need a black coffee. It was so much instruction for him in his head that he never got the order right, which meant he was always making mistakes with the orders. And because he was making mistakes, he was getting shouted at. And he got scared and ran away. Now one would wonder, why couldn't he get his order right? Why couldn't he, for example, write down the orders? Why couldn't he take 3 orders at a time or 5 orders at a time? Because doing all of that needs skills, needs the ability to make choices, the ability to make decisions, the ability to manage conflict, to solve problems. Our education system is not teaching our children these essential skills for life. Hence, a majority of the children, especially those who are growing up in poverty or in difficult circumstances, are running away, are disengaging, are giving up. And it's important for us that we understand the problem they are facing and how we, as educationists, are addressing that. Both Jan and Pavel have spoken about how the world is changing, how the pace of change in the world is increasingly fast, almost frantic. There's unpredictability. We're living in a VUCA world. There's high levels of complexity in the future. That's only one side of the problem. If you look at large sections, of example, in India, there are 300 million children in the country. 140 million children are growing up in poverty. 48 million children under the age of 5 are stunted. So when you have such large numbers of children growing up in poverty, you need to understand what's happening to them growing up. So the second side of the challenge is really childhood adversity. How many of you have children of your own? Quite a few. How many of you have interacted with children, young children? More or less all of us, right? If you imagine a young toddler who's learning to crawl, and they're in this room right now, and they're learning to crawl. And they're excited that they can crawl, and there is such a large room, so they're crawling all over the room. Then they get bold, and they crawl outside the room. They go to an unfamiliar environment, anxiety levels go up. So they crawl back into the room. What happens in a good family environment? A parent will notice that the child has high levels of anxiety. Maybe the kid will start crying. So they'll lift them up, they will hug them, and they will manage that anxiety. That's the first time the brain has got a message that this is how I manage anxiety. And you've learned to manage anxiety. And slowly you get bolder. Then you walk outside the room. Then you run. Then you go to school on your own, right? And you build those skills. Each of those are developmental milestones. Now imagine the same kid in a small home in a slum in India. When they learn to crawl and they crawl out of the home, they're usually on the street. When they come back into the room, either the parent is very stressed with life to take care of them and manage that anxiety, or there is no parent because they've gone to work. So there is no one to manage that anxiety. So your development has stopped there. And then at the age of 4, imagine this child goes to school. A completely unfamiliar environment, a new adult in the classroom, 40 other kids in the classroom, a new building, very high levels of anxiety. They don't know how to manage it because those development blocks have not happened. And the gap keeps increasing. By the time they've hit 18, what happened to this young man I spoke about, that's what happens. You don't know how to manage anxiety, so you run away. So one of the core challenges of how we are bringing up children is we're not understanding the impact of childhood adversity and how that impacts the achievement of developmental milestones in children. And a combination of children growing up in adversity and now entering a very complex world is that they are unprepared for life. Imagine this new scenario that we have in the world of displacement, of children of refugees, of families moving to other countries because they're not getting economic opportunities or because of war or poverty. What happens to those children? They experience high levels of adversity and they don't achieve developmental milestones. This clearly defines for me the crisis of education. The education system does not understand childhood adversity, does not respond to it. The education system is telling us learn to code, learn to read, write, and speak in English. But where's the world? Is education even relevant for our children today? What we need and what we are talking about as we build learning ecosystems is the idea of repurposing education, making it relevant for our kids in the 21st century. If our kids are entering an economic system where they're going to change 17 jobs in their lifetime, they need to know how to adapt. They need to know how to unlearn and relearn. My father had one job and one career for 45 years of his life. Our kids are going to have 17 jobs. Are they even prepared for that? So what we need is for education learning ecosystems to help our children build resilience, build the life skills, and build abilities to thrive in the 21st century. As Pavel very beautifully put it, thrive not just as an individual, but to thrive as communities, as family systems, and thriving of the planet. That's where we see repurposing of education. One way that we see thriving happening, we did a research study last year to look at what does thriving look like for children and young people who are growing up in extreme poverty. And one of the core elements that we discovered, that thriving at the core of it is about owning your story. We work with children in India that come from experiences of abuse, violence, being displaced, being orphaned, being abandoned. The traditional narrative is that let go of that story of yours. Build a new story. And what we discovered in our work with young people over the last 20 years is that help the young people to own their story. When they learn to own their story with dignity, they learn to accept their story with dignity. It doesn't mean that that past has to define their future. But they can understand that where they come from is what's built them into who they are, has given them the strength of who they are. And they can use that strength to make a new future for themselves. And that at the core of it is the idea of thriving, where you learn to thrive from where you come from. And as we expand that idea into what does it mean to build education learning ecosystems and how we are trying to do that in India now, where we work with 1 million children, at the core of it, at the first, is about keeping the child at the center of your work. Right? The education is designed for the child. The child is not designed for education. It is not the child's responsibility to fit into education. It is education's role and responsibility to design something that works for the child and works for the child in equity for children from all backgrounds. So at the core of it, for the first 10 years, we focused on designing programs, working directly with children and young people, developing life skills, social emotional competencies, designing curriculums, designing pedagogies, designing approaches. But at the core of it, it was about deep diving into understanding the child and how does the child learn? How does a child who's not had breakfast from home learn? How does a child who's probably being bullied walking from home to school, how do they learn? How do we design an education system for that child? So what we did was build innovation labs, worked with multiple partners, where we deepened the impact on the child. Today in our program, 99% of the young people that come into our program show a significant improvement in their ability to use life skills to make life choices every year. It was that level of high impact work that we had to do. But then we realized that's not enough, because we could take that to only 10,000 kids. The next step was, how do we transform adults that work with children? How do we create environments of care and empathy in classrooms, in school systems, in the way teachers and educators and parents engage with children? Because what we discovered is, even if one comes from the most difficult background, the most difficult circumstances, if you have one adult relationship which you can look up to, which is filled with care and empathy, is a transformative experience for the child. That's what we become as parents for our children. So the next step was to work with teachers and educators in creating transformative experiences for them so they can bring care and empathy in classrooms. Even that's not enough in a country where 140 million children are growing up in poverty. The next step was to look at education ecosystems itself. How do we work with governments? How do we work with researchers, media, employers on transforming them in the way they look at the purpose of education? So one big breakthrough that we had last year was we worked with one state government in Delhi and helped them introduce what they call a happiness curriculum. So today, 1 million children every single day across the state of Delhi in 1,000 schools start their school day with a happiness session, which includes mindfulness practices, storytelling, and experiential activities. 1 million kids every day today are changing the way they look at the school environment, from that of fear to now of joy. And as children are feeling more joyful in classrooms, their learning ability, their thrivability is increasing. And that's how we are transforming ecosystems. And as I speak, 4 other state governments have agreed to introduce a happiness curriculum in their school systems, which means 5 million children by next year in India are going to have access to social emotional learning capabilities. And that's how we are transforming ecosystems. But I want to finish with that last piece, which is around, it's not just about transforming ecosystems, it's about shifting mindsets. Like Jan beautifully put it, it's a 19th century system, 20th century structure for 21st century kids. We have to reframe our mindset around what is the purpose of education in the 21st century and how we are bringing together ecosystems around us that enable learning to happen, not just in school, but also outside of school. Not just with one core player as a teacher, but all of us being teachers. That's it. I'll end with that. Thank you.
So, first I wanted to ask both of you a question, maybe for sake of clarity of the audience. If you were to define one or several key principles which allow to explain the difference between more traditional ways of transforming education and this new emerging paradigm that uses ecosystem, what would be the critical difference, so to say?
I would say that until now, what we've done is reform education through curriculum, and also maybe through teaching a little. But actually, an ecosystem says that education is rich and deep and complex, and that there are many, many stakeholders, including students in the centre, but parents and business and government and everybody who's involved. Everybody is involved in learning. And so that is a really significant difference when we're thinking about the future of education rather than the past, which was a transaction between student and a teacher.
Yeah, I agree with what Jan said. I think at the core of it, traditional education was that there was a giver and there was a receiver. The teacher was considered the expert, the one with the knowledge, who then delivered and gave that knowledge to students. That equation has changed now. We have Google for that. We don't need a teacher for that. But the teacher increasingly has a much more important role. What do children do with this excessive access to information and knowledge that they're getting? How do they make sense of this knowledge in helping them make choices and decisions that will help them to thrive in the future? That shift in the role of the teacher is where 21st century is sitting. And the second point I'll add to that is the relevance of education itself. In the industrial age, the role of education was so that we could learn to be clerks, so that we could feed into a factory system. We do no longer use that. I mean, even our offices don't look like factories anymore. We're increasingly in a highly collaborative world, dealing with very, very complex challenges. Education system needs to change that relationship with the child and prepare them for that complexity.
Thank you. I would like to offer an opportunity to ask questions to all of us, and then I want, as you see, we are sitting in this setup, and just maybe to quickly announce before you, and while you think about your questions, that we will have opportunity after that to move into your thinking about ecosystems, where you think they're emerging, what is needs that drives them. And we will have both the opportunity to think individually. You have these templates to fill in that will help you think about it. And then we will have discussions. We have our dear facilitators with us who will support this discussion. So you will be able to share your thinking about what drives ecosystem, where they emerge, what happens, what we can do together. So, but maybe first, if you have any questions to Jen or to Vishal or to me, I welcome you.
So I have a question to Vishal. So basically you deal with students or from underprivileged backgrounds. So what is the mechanism of how do you bring in the drive in them to might be to get transformed or to get their skills developed? Because as you said, the very background they are from or the experiences they undergo or may not keep them in a very pleasant mindset. So how do you inculcate that drive or interest in them to take up such skills, to take up training in such skills?
I'm going to invite you to shift that narrative you've built about how do you build drive. because there you're putting the responsibility on the child. The child is always driven. Does not matter what background they come from. Even a child from a very poor family, you give them some material, they'll create something out of it. Because a human being's natural approach is curiosity and learning. It's about identifying that and creating an enabling environment for more of that to happen. Right? So how do you transform school systems which help children who are coming from difficult backgrounds to unlock that level of creativity? The use of arts, for example, or the use of play, the use of empathy-based pedagogies, the relationship that the teacher has with the child, of that of acceptance, of that of non-judgmental approach, of that of empathy, are all core principles that help unlock that drive. The drive is always there, right? We need to shift the narrative from holding the child responsible to we pushing ourselves and saying, how do I work with this child? How do I become creative to be able to work with this child?
Maybe can you help?
Thank you.
Okay.
My question is, how can we help teachers that are already teaching in a particular method, they already have a curriculum, how they teach? How can we teach them new skills? Because you can't just throw them out and bring new sets of teachers in. So what process can we take to help the teachers to change to this new concept? Thank you.
We have discovered, working with many teachers, that teachers want to be doing this different work. They actually believe and understand about students thriving. But I think it's two things we need to do. Number one is I don't talk about teachers anymore, actually. I talk about educators. And I do that because I believe that teaching, and our research says that teaching is going to be a very small part of what that person does in the future. Because a teacher is also a broker and a connector and a curator of information and a facilitator and a coach and a mentor. So that all of that is kind of the new educator, right? The 21st century educator, particularly the coach. The coach and mentor is a really important role. So I think that number one, we need to think about what does the profession look like, and let's articulate that. And then secondly, how will we train and upskill teachers, educators very quickly with new skills? But our experience is that they are interested and they are engaged, particularly the next generation of young educators are very interested. But we need to have a better training system for them, and also for them not to think that they have to have the answer, but they're a learner as well for the rest of their life. So they're an educator and they're a learner alongside students.
If there's one more question,
Right
then
here.
we can. Yeah, please.
Да, огромное спасибо за...
Thank you very much for the most interesting experience, but I'm very much worried by the question, what is the cost of the happiness curriculum? Is it financed by the state, or is it done by the fund who is providing the new curriculum study and getting a wonderful result?
Two things here. Number one, in our country, and I think also in Russia actually, there is a 75% of employers cannot find people with the skills that they need. And yet, in our country, 1 in 3 young people is or underemployed. So they have a degree, and I met one of your volunteers yesterday. He's not in the room, so I can talk about him, who is a physicist and a mathematician in Russia, and he works in logistics at DHL because he cannot get a job in where he has trained. So we are already paying the cost of this disconnect between learning and also what employers want. So that it's $4.5 billion in Australia. It's huge. So I think we're already paying. We're already paying for this problem. So then it's about, well, how are we going to change the question or change the problem to get a different result? But and it would save money. It will save a lot of money if we can change this system and have more young people thriving and working and contributing than being unemployed or underemployed right now, and it will help employers.
Is that? There was one research study that was done where it said a $1 investment in social emotional learning skills gives you a return of $11 across the lifetime of a young person. The second piece I want to say is around building the education ecosystem. It's about how do you shift the priorities of the governments from traditional learning systems to this more 21st century learning system. So for example, what we did with the Delhi government, they introduced an entirely new subject called happiness in the school calendar. The school calendar, if you see across the world, for the last 60, 70, maybe 100 years, has more or less remained the same. No one has touched it, but they managed to shift it. Our investment in that project was one person and two people who helped design the curriculum, one person who managed the partnership, but the government invested millions of dollars in enabling that new curriculum to be brought to 1 million kids. So it's about how do you unlock capital from the government itself? How do you help governments prioritize learning for the 21st century? And how do you help them show that, demonstrate that by actually making monetary investments in the 21st century skilling?
Yeah, I would also give my version of an answer. So in our work, we discover that there are a lot of hidden resources in the system. So if we need mentors, if we need schools, if we need learning spaces, if we need equipment, it's all there. And it's all underused. The point of ecosystem is not to invest a lot into creating some new system. It's actually to connect what is there. To connect resources, people, providers, organizations to work together. So it's a little bit like a sharing economy paradigm. You actually get recognition that there are these abundant resources that are totally not used, people, spaces, and so on, and you can actually increase the efficiency of these resources without investing too much. Let's say just a fraction of what you invest if you create a totally new system. So that would be my answer. So it's not expensive. That's the whole point. It's not expensive at all. It's a structural shift that begins with the mindset that is expensive. To change the mindset is expensive, but it's more expensive not in terms of money, but in terms of the fact that people need to let go of how they were working in the past. That's a cost, but that brings benefits. It's an investment, actually. So, yeah, the last one, but we need to...
Sorry, I got a question.
Yes, please, but
Yeah.
the last question.
On a lighter note, Jan, I wanted to ask you, what do you teach your rugby and your cricket players, because South Africa always beats them?
Cruel question. Lucky New Zealand isn't here. Or England. Is New Zealand or England in the room?
All right, on a serious note, the way we're currently producing teachers, shouldn't you just stop and maybe produce different type of teachers?
Yeah.
How successful will it be, this approach of saying, let's look at the current methods of producing teachers and intervene with some kind of tech in it? Will it fly? Or should we just stop all these colleges and produce different kind of tech-savvy teachers?
Yeah. It's a really great question, and I think it's that and more. So one of our pieces of research as well is that we discovered that there are many other people working with students other than teachers. So in our community, there are non-government organisations, there are sporting groups, there are parents, there are, there are many people who are educators. And so how do we privilege that entire ecosystem of the people who educate children and young people, how do we think about that differently, of which the teacher is one part of that? And how do we release and liberate them to do different things and to also learn, continue to learn? Yes, it's a really great conversation. But I think the teacher is one part of a lot of people engaged with children and young people.
Can I just add something? So you've thrown a very radical question. I want to push it back and say, teachers are not the problem. We are again putting responsibility on the teacher that the teacher is not good enough. The teacher has also come from the same system. Their teaching has also been in a very traditional model. When I go into towns and small villages across India, teachers tell us that we know this system is not working for the children. But we don't know what to do because no one is training us in a different way. And I had this teacher, a very senior teacher from a government school who had been teaching for 20 years. And the big skill that we invested in him was about unlocking his own creativity and building his ability to listen to his children. He finished the training, he went back, and he shared this later with us, that he had a girl in his classroom, 11-year-old, who was always coming late to class. And every time she came late to class, he sent her away. And he thought that was the best thing he was doing. He was disciplining her. He went through this training, learned about this whole idea of listening, went back to the classroom. The girl came late. He sat her down, and he said, I want to understand, why do you come late to school? The girl was shocked. But she found courage, and she said, I get up very early in the morning. I help my parents with household chores, and then I run to school to be on time. But I'm always late because we don't have a clock at home. Now, in that one conversation, the relationship that the teacher had with his student shifted. Because he came with a judgment that this girl is not invested in education. But what he came away with was that this girl is making an effort every day to be on time. So it's about shifting this. It's about trusting our teachers, giving them the tools that are needed to build new relationships of trust, of engagement, of listening, or authenticity, of creativity. It's not about saying let's not invest in these teachers, let's build new teachers. Invest in these teachers, but help them shift who they are.
Okay, I think there can be many more questions, but I wanted us to collectively explore some of these questions. So you're sitting now in semicircles. Let's try to establish whole circles. And for Russian audience, если вы, коллеги, если...
Colleagues, if you have language barriers, there is Jan, and he is gathering a Russian group. And let's set up a Russian group here, near translators. So,
It'll be a conversation between you. We only have not so much time allocated for it, but let's say about 15 minutes. But to start the conversation, you already have, well, I think you can get together to have more, kind of maybe a group of 8 people, if you could. So what I would like to suggest, you have these little sheets on your chairs. They have 3 questions about the focus of learning ecosystems, who are the actors, who are the players of the ecosystem, and what can drive the change, so to say. And where can we collaborate? Where and how we can collaborate? So I would like to suggest, let's have a discussion around this, but with a focus of why we need ecosystems and who can be the drivers of change and how can we participate in this change. So, 15 minutes now. suggest maybe you can follow up. Да, хоть как? We can say all sit down. Do you want to sit down? First of all. С этим, со словом. Я понял. Смысл такой, что здесь я понимаю, что должен быть будущее. Да, экосистема, образовательная экосистема в профессиональном образовании и обучении. Это первый вопрос. Что должно быть в фокусе образовательной экосистемы? Но мы можем сюда включить профориентирование, которое может начинаться со школы. Вы можете его начинаем, скажем, со средней школы. Понятно, что можно пытаться профориентировать еще и детского сада. Но я верю в это. Но мы пока не можем проверить. В данный момент у нас на это есть 15 минут. Да. В смысле, на все три вопроса? Замечательно. Когда побыстрее, пожалуйста, 5 минут. Когда у нас 5 минут на первую группу, вы пока... А вы уже достали? Хорошо, я даже скажу, что буквально 2 минуты. Хорошо. Второй вопрос, пока я озвучу. Кто должен поддерживать трансформацию для того, чтобы эта система работала, запустилась и потом продолжала развиваться? Это какие-то внутренние, национальные, внутренние, на уровне, условно говоря, субъектов? Или это национальная история? Пишите, что вы считаете нужным. Может быть, это международные какие-то организации, структуры, которые должны поддерживать развитие, создание, развитие и продолжение этой системы, которую вы считаете все психология образования общего, но и профессионального, да, то есть именно вот такого отраслевого, да, замечательно. Озвучивает эфир. Что нужно сделать, как можно, какие цепочки нужно сделать, чтобы сотрудничество помогало создавать конкретные системы? Кто должен сотрудничать, чтобы создавались новые образовательные системы? Yes, I will now. Really funny photos. Какие существуют механизмы или практики, соединить, собственно, образовательную систему и тех драйверов, стейкхолдеров, которые развивают. 3 минуты, 3 minutes.
Чтобы не было
So you had to have a big discussion.
Like it was going back and forth, and like they gave us like 1 hour or 10 minutes for everything. I mean,
So there's no other workshops, they're just talks. Is that right?
there are very, very few that are interactive.
Wow. Amazing.
I'd say that had a lot of discussions. Panels, no interaction. That's like the maximum. Have a round table and some discussion. That's like
So this is breaking all the rules.
It's unfortunate you always end on нужно шить одежду, нужно копать одежду, нужно что-то. Но при этом есть какие-то такие инструменты.
Не говори, что это время.
У вас есть там предприятия, которые запрашивают.
ну, она такая, наверное, сильно изменилась, немножко так. Да, ну, уже мы заканчиваем просто, да. Okay, 1 minute to finish your discussions. 1 минуту на завершение. И сейчас перейдем. And I will ask you to give a few insights that came up within your conversation. И просто поделиться, может быть, основными идеями, инсайтами, которые родились.
They're ready.
Okay. Let's give other people about 30 seconds to finish, and then we'll... Okay? 30 seconds, 20 seconds.
It's the last session, so it's
Вот, что? Коллеги, у вас большая группа, я понимаю, что вы только раскачались. Я предлагаю как бы на этом этапе сейчас заморозить немножко, но с пониманием, что мы продолжим с вами длинный разговор. Я предлагаю поделиться тем, до чего вы дошли. So I suggest we share what we have been able to reach. I know that 15 minutes is not enough for anything, but kind of to kick your thinking and some of the insights that you came to, I would like to welcome groups to share what you have been discussing and what are your key ideas. Anyone?
The focus there, we said it should be on employment and providing assessment to determine if they are ready for the workplace. Another focus should be on the involvement of all stakeholders, including parents. Another group of stakeholders that we need to focus on should be the students and the learners. And as we focus on them, the focus should be how can we make them confident? How can they be self-motivated to follow their dreams, to follow their passion, to find happiness, to thrive in society and really find ways to enjoy living. Another focus should be on career counseling. How do we make them aware of traditional areas along with new and emerging areas? What skills and knowledge should we equip them with to be ready to undertake the new world and the emerging world, and to be able to apply in different settings? And another point was made in terms of getting them ready for the labor market.
Thank you. Have you been able to discuss who can be the driver of change in this transformation?
That has some of them, but I guess that hits on some of them. Employers.
Employers.
Yeah. Students, employers.
So it's a multi-stakeholder involvement, engagement to work together. Thank you.
I think to keep up with change, we need to, that's why we've got to do it. To get the participation from as many children as possible and as many people.
Can you put it? Yeah,
I can put it up. Yep. To get an improved human, peaceful planet improvement, like the actual environment that we live in has got to be keeping on improvement, and that'll keep jobs coming. Experience learning, like you're saying, is getting the kids outside and doing it, can be lost because there's a risk aversion thing, like the kids could get hurt, so you can't let them climb the tree, you can't let them get out and learn by being young and learning. The funds would usually be there in the whole education system. There's a little bit of money needed, but to get the ideas, and I think the media could help a lot because they're into sensationalism, and the news is usually a repeat. Like you can get some good reports and get the good stories going and create jobs. Well, as the jobs are created, that people will see that and strive to fill a job. And working with sport and through sport, and if you improve the household, you'll improve life. The parents, bring everybody up as well. Thank you.
Thank you. What has been your version of who can be the drivers of this change?
What has been our version?
I know you have some responses.
Yeah. Well, like I'm saying, using sport and improving the household, you will get the education system that we already have can just change a little bit. It evolves rather than actually instant change.
Okay, thank you. Давайте я могу перевести кого-то, кто готов.
I can do the translation from the Russian part. Потому что у них нет с собой аппаратуры.
Это пересечение линий.
We understand the focus as the lines crossing. When we're building the ecosystem for the education, the focus should be the teacher and the student.
On is as the main point where all the forces are interconnected. We need to focus on learners themselves and teachers. and specialization.
Да, да.
Yes, right. The driver is the one who provides for the development and the movement forward. Of course, accordingly to the constitution of the Russian Federation, it should be a state, and jointly with the business and together with the community and the professional community.
First group said that
Мы же говорим, мы же в России
the
живем.
driver of change needs to be a collaboration between government, business and professional communities.
Нет. Ну,
And I would like to repeat that before we change the state regulation, we are talking that the constitution of the Russian Federation is the state itself, and the tool is technologies applicable. And in this new ecosystem, the technologies are changing according to the focus.
Technological change, new technologies, and shift towards skills of the future is one of the key tools through which we can kind of coordinate the ecosystem. No. So that's the opinions. Thank you very much. I know it's a very, very short time, actually. Я понимаю, что времени очень мало.
It's really very short time.
The idea was to kind of get us start thinking about these questions, because, of course, these questions require much more time. И нужно сильно больше времени, нужно
We really need days.
to discuss the question. But I hope that you leave with these questions to explore as you go back to your teams, to your countries, and you can continue conversations. And I would like us to give a round of applause to leaders who presented their cases, to Jen and to Vishal. I think it was very inspirational. Thank you very much.